So as I'm sure everyone knows by now, I love to play video games from time to time. When I began learning Japanese, I wanted to try a bunch of games that I had before or ones that I've always wanted to. Chameleon Twist was actually a game I've never played, but instead I played the sequel. It was one of those random games my cousins rented, and I never saw it again outside of that. Years later, as I began my Japanese journey, I figured it would be a good game to play and study with. That was almost 8 years ago now, so it's time to give it another spin and see how it is. Chameleon Twist was made by Japan System Supply, a developer based in Osaka. You've probably never heard of them, and that's because they went bankrupt in 2000. But they're not really credited in the games that they make, except for this one and the sequel, basically. They've made other educational and PC software games too, I guess, but there's really not much information on them outside of that stuff. I usually love talking about the history and the development of games, but there's not too much to say here. It's hard to find any information. But one of the main guys behind the scenes and responsible for development, Hideyuki Nakanishi, has some posts online, and in English too, about how he designed the tongue physics and then worked on the second game as a programmer as well. Originally, they only planned to release the game only in Japan before being convinced by Nintendo to release it worldwide. According to Nakanishi, 30,000 copies were produced for Japan, 80,000 for Europe, and then 100,000 for America. Not having played the original US version, I was a bit surprised to learn that the Japanese version is in fact the superior one. Whole entire areas are present which aren't even in the international versions for some reason. There's also hints from the White Rabbit, power-ups, and even this guy. I'm not sure the reason for these massive changes, but it's a case of gamers outside of Japan getting the short end of the stick, again. And I wonder if this game would be more fondly remembered had this version got out. It's hard to say though. So jumping into it, the game starts off with our protagonist, who's actually a real chameleon, following this Alice in Wonderland-like rabbit through a portal. He comes out not looking like a chameleon at all, but he still has all the benefits of one, namely being the long tongue. You can use this to latch onto the logs sticking out of the ground. You'll see them almost everywhere, so it's really easy to get around, moving across gaps or around walls. You can also use them to do this handstand-like move, which can help you get up high walls. If you practice a bit, you can manage to fling yourself up higher than usual. Like the rest of the tongue play though, it's a little tricky to get used to at first. When you move along and get to the end of the game and have to move across large gaps, it can be a bit frustrating. The tongue stretches out pretty far, but the way you latch onto things specifically and spin around them will be really important. That said, the actual movement of the characters themselves feels pretty good. You know, it's that N64 style movement. It's similar to Mario 64, but a bit more stiff, I suppose, but not a big deal. I'm totally biased here, but there's just something about the feeling of 3D platformers on this console. Japan's supply system had little connection, if any, with the teams at Nintendo, but you would think that they were at least a subsidiary after moving around with these characters. But it's not all flowers and roses, unfortunately. The biggest complaint I have here, and this seems to be sentiment echoed online, is that the camera is pretty bad. You have a fixed camera position and a free-ish camera as well. Now, I've seen people complain about Mario 64's camera, but this game is something else. And not just the control of it, but just the angles. The first level is a really good example of this. The overhead angle in the first area just feels awkward, and eventually it does fix itself as the game goes on and you explore other places. But that said, it's just a bit of a taste of what's to come. When you get to the kids' world and you'll be doing this platforming over a bottomless pit, the angles can make it a total pain to grab onto things and swing yourself around. Even with the free camera, it's really hard to adjust it properly, and you'll be left frustrated, especially since mentally it'll throw you off the way you swing around. There are easier roads to take, but if you eventually manage to get the mechanics down, you can skip so many areas and clear things quickly. Check out a task or a regular speedrun to see what I mean. Another issue I have is the length. This is a really short game. You only have 6 real levels here with kind of bonuses included. You have the jungle, Antland, Bombland, Desertland, Kidsland, and Ghost Castle. For some reason, the Ghost Castle is the only one that isn't a land per se, but it's still pretty impressive in size, and it's one of the more challenging levels. I definitely think it and Kidsland are where things got really tough. To be honest, the first few levels are pretty easy, especially Jungle Land. It's an introduction to the game, so I get why it's so easy, but with only 6 real levels, it feels like they should have upped the difficulty a bit more. I think the music does a good job of complementing the levels. It's a wacky world and that's reflected in the soundtrack. It's upbeat and it feels very 90s in a good way. It almost feels like you could hear it on the Super Nintendo, but with the obvious improvements of the N64's sound chip. It's not going to blow your socks off or anything, but it's a great companion as you travel. And sure, it can get repetitive, especially if you've been to the world for a while, but again, these levels aren't so hard, so you won't be hearing them for too long, to be honest. So the big question is, does it still hold up? And I think it does, honestly. The tug mechanics are a unique feature, and it's something I'd like to see brought back. Although it is a pretty short game, and it can be cleared within a day pretty easily. Getting all of the collectible crowns and carrots will take a bit more time, but they do add to the game length, so it's worth going over in my opinion. With snappy and poppy tunes, and decent mechanics with a unique gimmick, I think it's worth checking out if you're a platforming enthusiast, especially the early N64 style platforming. It's no Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie, but it'll definitely surprise you at least a little bit. It's short, sweet, can be improved, but it's still fun. It's a bit hard to get nowadays though, only having been released on the N64 and never having a virtual console release. You're still hoping someone figures out who has the rights. Since Japan System Supply dissolved, I don't even know who would have them now. Maybe Sunsoft does. They actually tweeted on Christmas Eve in 2021 about games they'd like fans for them to remake. I guess this isn't technically a game they developed, but hey, it's worth a shot. Let's get this game back out there. I think putting this game on the Switch would be a great idea because it could introduce it to a whole new generation. Somebody please, make it happen. If you like what you saw, be sure to subscribe here and also to GPX Japan. We do all sorts of game videos on there too, and I'm with a bunch of great guys, so we would love it if you guys could help support the channel so we could grow. But thanks again for watching, have a great one guys, and take care.